When the police found me, I was in tatters, hands covered in blood, standing by a shattered window. Vivian was crying her heart out in front of me, but her eyes glinted with satisfaction. "Sister, come back. I'll convince my brother-in-law to accept you. Vivian, it's not your fault. She doesn't deserve to marry into the Greens." My fiancé, Simon Green, held her protectively, looking at me in disgust. Already damaged goods, pretending to be some chaste martyr? Did they think I was going to jump? I laughed so hard I almost doubled over, casually kicking 2 pieces of broken glass on the floor. One hit Simon right between the legs, the other grazed Vivian's cheek as it flew by. Amidst their shocked screams, I said, "Well, you two really are a perfect match." I spent 5 years working in a noisy factory, screwing parts together until one day, a limited edition Rolls-Royce rolled up to the dusty entrance. I got in the back seat with my battered suitcase, feeling all the envious eyes of my co-workers on me. Just like that, I became the daughter of the richest man in a city. "Where's my dad?" I asked the driver. He glanced at me in the rearview mirror, but didn't say a word. Soon, I was standing in the villa, face to face with my father, Edward. He was the wealthiest man in a city until a recent car crash planned by his enemies. During the emergency blood transfusion, they discovered that his only beloved daughter was a fake. That was when they found and brought me home. By then, I had spent 5 years in the factory, and the only thing linking me to a wealthy heiress was my face. After the transfusion, his complexion improved, but he still sat in a wheelchair. The curly-haired girl in the champagne-colored dress behind him was Vivian, the imposter who had taken over my life for 20 years. On the couch sat a handsome stranger. The dazzling lights highlighted my embarrassment. I stood there in my dingy work clothes, like a beggar stumbling into a palace. They looked at me, calm yet a bit disdainful, not the least bit welcoming. Maybe they had stared enough because Vivian came over and kindly grabbed my hand. "You must be Violet. Can we be sisters?" Before I could respond, Edward rasped, "Now that you're back, learn some manners from Vivian, and don't make trouble outside." "All right, sis, let me introduce you," Vivian said, pulling me toward the stranger, her eyes locking tenderly with his. "This is your fiancé, Simon, though." The man's face darkened on the couch, as if waiting impatiently for her to finish, without even sparing me a glance. She paused, then lowered her head with a bitter smile. "Never mind, he was yours to begin with." The moment Vivian stopped speaking, Simon stood up abruptly. Like he'd been holding it in forever, he gripped Vivian with red eyes, demanding, "What's this supposed to mean? We're about to get married, and now you're dumping me on someone else?" Sighing, he wrapped his arms around her, as the two practically clung together. Edward coughed, motioning the housekeeper to take him upstairs, and didn't seem to mind that my supposed fiancé was wrapped around my supposedly sister. I stood awkwardly on the side, as if I was watching a soap opera, playing the evil supporting role tearing apart star-crossed lovers. That was when I realized I had a fiancé, and they hadn't even asked if I wanted to marry him. I thought being the daughter of the richest man meant no worries about food or clothes at least. But Edward hated my poor table manners, didn't even allow me to dine with them. I had to wait until after they finished to eat the leftovers in the kitchen. Visitors were treated to Vivian's tastes, and if she deemed me unfit, she passed down her outdated clothes. I went to Edward to protest, and he brushed me off impatiently. "Do you really care what you wear looking like that? Second-hand clothes beat those rags on you any day. Don't be ungrateful. My money doesn't grow on trees." With his 60th birthday approaching, Vivian suggested bringing me into high society and took me to a club. Even my fiancé Simon was there, sticking close to Vivian, his gaze fixed on her. Everyone looked at me with strange eyes, as I ignored everything, busying myself with the snacks on the fruit platter. These people were Vivian's friends, and didn't like me much. They sidled over with taunting questions. "Heard you used to live in the mountains. People there must be really open, right? All about stealing husbands? Can't compare to your so-called civilization." I brushed snack crumbs off my hands, giving them a glance before settling my eyes on Vivian and Simon. Right under everyone's noses, and you got the sister-in-law clinging to her brother-in-law. Simon splayed out on the sofa, one hand draped on the back behind Vivian. Half of Vivian's body leaned into him, her head resting on his chest. Hearing my words, the affectionate pair went pale. Vivian's expression turned awkward, and she straightened her posture, nibbling her lower lip pitifully. Simon glared at me with depths of anger, like I committed some unspeakable crime. He then pulled Vivian into his arms again, taunting. "You think you can marry me? Look at yourself. Do you think you could compare to Vivian? Best to call off the engagement yourself, or else." He squinted but didn't say what would happen otherwise. "Simon, don't scare sister." Vivian tugged Simon's sleeve and came to sit beside me. She filled my cup with wine, handing it over. "Sister, I was just upset, and Simon was comforting me. If it bothers you, why don't you drink with me instead?" Her sugary words flipped the script to make me the unreasonable one. I looked down at the overflowing glass and took it. Little did I know, just one drink and my head was buzzing. I collapsed into the cushion, my vision blurring. Vivian, having barely sipped, looked worse than I did. Simon immediately fussed over her. "Vivian, are you okay?" "Simon, I feel sick, need to go home," Vivian whined, her voice syrupy. "You know you shouldn't drink so much, but you're just showing off. I'm taking you home now." Simon softly scolded, pinched her cheek, then bent down, picked her up, and left the room. Everyone else in the room slowly left, as if they didn't even notice me lounging on the sofa. I felt a bit dizzy and sat for a while longer. Suddenly, the door swung open again, and 5 sketchy guys walked in. "Vivian wants us to take you home." In my daze, I found myself being carried out of the room. When the police found me, I was standing by a shattered window. My clothes were a mess, and my hands were covered in blood. Vivian was crying in front of me, but I saw the satisfaction in her eyes. "Sis, come back. I'll convince your brother-in-law to accept you." "Vivian, it's not your fault. She doesn't deserve to marry into the Greens." My fiancé Simon held her close, whispering comfort, then turned to glare at me with disgust. "You were never good enough, acting all pure and whatnot? Did they think I was going to jump?" I laughed so hard I nearly doubled over, kicking aside 2 pieces of broken glass. One piece hit Simon in the crotch. The other nicked Vivian's cheek as it flew by. Amid their screams, I said, "Yeah, you two do fit each other better." Simon didn't recover, and became a cripple. The Greens came demanding explanations, but Edward settled it with money, shelling out even more for top foreign doctors to fix Vivian's scarred face. "Edward keeps me around for my blood. I'm a lifesaver. Vivian? She's the social butterfly. But whatever, I've got my own agenda. I wouldn't be putting up with this otherwise." Edward locked me up in a villa to stop more drama. When Vivian's fiancé Carter showed up, I was in the kitchen wiping dishes. The door burst open, and he stormed in, shaking with rage as he grabbed my hand. "Violet, you heartless bitch. How dare you disfigure Vivian?" I let go, and the plate shattered on the floor. I picked up a piece of the broken plate, holding it to his neck, raising an eyebrow. "What? Want to try it?" Feeling the cold edge, Carter's eyes widened, his face went pale, and he let go of my hand. "What are you doing? Are you insane?" I tilted my head, smiling. "Yeah, driven mad by Vivian. If it weren't for her, none of this would have happened. Since you're her fiancé, why don't you pay for her sins?" "Carter." Vivian appeared at the door, her face bandaged, looking distressed. Seeing her so flustered, I laughed. From her angle, she probably thought I was seducing her fiancé. Sure enough, she rushed over, pulling Carter away to shield him. "Have you not had enough? You ruined Simon and now want Carter for revenge?" I smiled slightly. Nice, she finally dropped the act. Carter, nearly having his throat slit, was still touching his neck, swallowing hard. "What's wrong, Carter? This Violet is insane. She just tried to kill me." Carter pointed at me, fuming, but didn't dare get closer. "What?" Vivian recoiled, hiding behind Carter, but still glared at me, accusing. "Sis, I shouldn't have left you that night, but Carter wasn't there. It's not fair to blame him." I played with the shard in my hand, smiling. "True. If he were there, how would you get time with Simon?" Vivian looked panicked, wide-eyed. "Sis, stop making stuff up. Simon and I are innocent, especially after what you did." "Oh." I nodded knowingly. "So Simon's useless now, and you're back with your good-for-nothing fiancé?" "Sis," Vivian cried, brimming with tears. "What lies are you spreading now? Violet, don't go too far." Carter shouted angrily. Do you think Vivian is as shameless as you? I lost the smile, staring coldly at both. Carter seemed to think he hit a nerve, sneering. You know what happened. Don't project your filth onto others. Enough, Carter. Don't provoke her anymore. Vivian cut in, soothing but still choked with tears, making her look so innocent. Oh, if our dear Vivian is so clean, do you still want this tarnished earring? I showed a worn pearl earring, feigning regret. Wasn't this a gift from Carter? Throwing it away seems wasteful. Vivian's face drained of color at the sight, paler than the pearl itself. She never imagined I saw everything that night. Carter's curiosity piqued, recognizing the earring. Vivian quickly snatched it, forcing a smile. I've been looking everywhere for this, didn't expect it here. Curious where I found it? I asked Carter. Just as Carter opened his mouth, Vivian chimed in. Where else? In your room, of course. Are you trying to accuse me of something, sis? I smirked, coolly replying. Didn't you lose it while in bed with someone else? Gulan. Gushwe shot me a stunned look. Fear clouded her eyes, though she put on a wounded facade. How could you spread lies? I'm your sister. Sure, sis. I shrugged. Carter, I swear it wasn't me. Vivian sobbed, nearly collapsing. Carter hesitated, finally holding her in reassurance. Don't cry, Vivian. She's just jealous. I trust you. I pinched the bridge of my nose, shaking my head. Idiots do seem to flock together. A few days later, after Vivian's face was fixed, she came over saying she wanted to take me out. I just had blood drawn, lying weakly on the bed. Under the watchful eye of the servants, Vivian sweetly took my hand. Sis, my face is healed, and Dad's not mad at you. How about taking a walk? Sure. I hugged her back, grinning even wider than she was. When we reached downtown, Vivian told the driver to stop. Driver, I'm taking my sister shopping, she said. The driver, tasked with guarding me as a walking blood bank, looked a little conflicted. But Sir said, don't worry. I'll make sure nothing happens to her. Vivian chimed in sweetly. Please, driver, we'll be back soon and Dad will never know. All right, call me when you need a ride back, the driver agreed, chuckling in a mix of indulgence and resignation. Everyone at the booths, including the staff, adored Vivian and her charming antics. In stark contrast, they all despised me, the wild and uncouth one. The driver shot me a warning glance. Stick with Miss Vivian and don't cause trouble. Sir's patience with you is running thin. I just pulled a half-hearted smile and didn't answer. Vivian led me into the mall, stopping outside a store. After noticing the sign beside the store, I finally got her plan. The sign clearly advocated for the importance of gynecological checkups and women's health. Seeing my attention on the sign, Vivian raised her voice, feigning concern. Sis, you've been back for so long without a checkup. How about we go in? We don't know if those people were diseased. A crowd soon gathered, blatantly staring, and most eyes landed on me after her remark. There was curiosity, sympathy, and disdain. Why should I go in? I asked, feigning confusion. Did you forget? Vivian looked at me in surprise, reminding me loudly. That night you were so drunk. We reviewed the cameras. You were taken away by 4 or 5 guys, then. Later, those guys took me to a motel on the outskirts. Pretending to recall, I widened my eyes in mock realization and grabbed her shoulders suddenly. Stay away. I screamed while clawing at Vivian's clothes. Vivian was startled, and the surrounding crowd backed away, but their eyes stayed fixed on us. Let go. Violet, are you crazy? Vivian was left in just her underwear, hair a mess as she screamed. Suddenly, she looked more like the crazy one. People started pulling out their phones to take pictures. She crouched down, trying to cover her body, and I took the opportunity to slip through the crowd and leave. Outside the mall, I borrowed a phone from a passerby and dialed a familiar number. Jay, is everything set? After the response, I exhaled with relief and said with a grin, well, let's give the old man a surprise at his birthday banquet. Returning the phone, I caught the person's curious gaze. The handsome guy did seem a bit familiar. You, I began to say, but before I could finish, the driver caught up with me. Expectedly, I was locked up again. Edward punished me with a 3-day fast due to the mall incident. If not for the need of my blood, he might have starved me to death. With Edward's birthday banquet approaching, my supposed brother Ken would soon return. Edward couldn't have a son, so he adopted Ken. I had only seen a half-face photo of this brother. It was with Vivian at a masquerade ball. The look in their eyes told me something wasn't right. Sure enough, the recently repaired door was kicked open again. I was sunbathing by the window when a large shadow suddenly loomed over me. The newcomer grabbed my throat, forcing me to look up at him. Recognizing his face, I was a bit shocked. Before dropping out, I had saved a non-swimmer once. The youthful face from under the water matched the harsh lines in front of me now. I don't care if you're the Booths' real daughter. I'm here to warn you. If you ever hurt Simon again, I'll make you pay. His fingers tightened, fury evident in his eyes. Clearly, the klutz from the water had forgotten me, and was now reenacting the farmer and snake tale. I curled my lips disdainfully, closed my eyes without any struggle. He eventually let go, aware that he'd risk losing his adoptive father's lifeline. Gasping and coughing, I clutched my throat. He gave me a cold glance before turning to leave. Wait, I called out. Thinking I might be provoking, he stopped obediently, ready for more antics. I opened the window without a screen and beckoned mysteriously. Come here, isn't that Vivian? Ken frowned but didn't hesitate, striding over. His gaze followed mine outside the window. I gave a strong push to his back, sending him plunging like a kite with a broken string. Splash! Water flew up from the pool. Unfortunately, Ken survived. Ken was Edward's carefully chosen successor, showing great talent from a young age. Upon his return, Vivian was constantly glued to him, barely acknowledging her fiancé. Considering her side affairs, Ken could be considered her main guy, right? Perhaps Vivian should thank me. If I hadn't pushed him, she wouldn't have had the excuse of taking care of her brother bedside. On Edward's birthday, I was still locked in my room. He'd added 2 more bodyguards, fearing I'd sneak out and cause trouble. He underestimated me. If I wanted to leave, even 10 guards wouldn't stop me. The banquet was held in the villa garden, guests mingling below, violin music wafting through the windows. Seeing the 3 at the heart of the party, I chuckled. Vivian was quite occupied, her fiancé to the left, brother to the right. What was that dance called again? After watching for a while, I grew impatient. When were they going to show up? Just as the thought crossed my mind, a roar erupted below. The violin music abruptly stopped as a military green pickup barreled into the garden. The headlights shattered one by one as it crashed in. A silver-haired teenager got out of the driver's seat, with 5 rough-looking men sitting in the pickup bed. Here comes the show. Watching the stunned guests below, I happily took a sip from the wine glass. Down, down, line up. The silver-haired guy ushered the 5 muscular men out like herding sheep. Everyone was dazed by the surprise, not noticing Vivian's suddenly pale face. I was upstairs, but I saw everything crystal clear. Edward, realizing what was happening, looked upset and ordered the bodyguards to step in. I'm just here to deliver a birthday gift to Mr. Edward, said the silver-haired guy, grinning as he held out a beautifully wrapped gift box. I'll take it, Vivian said, forcing a smile as she stepped forward to grab the gift. The silver-haired guy didn't let go, grinning mischievously. No way. This gift has to be opened now so everyone can enjoy it. Vivian shot a pleading look at Ken and Carter. Why are you standing there? Get them out. Both ordered the bodyguards in unison. I'm pretty curious about what's inside this interesting gift, came a deep male voice from behind. Everyone turned to look, surprised at who it was. I didn't see the person, just heard the heated discussion below. Felix White is here. Isn't he on his own now? Without the White's connections, how's he managing? You didn't hear? He's the brains behind S Corporation. In 2 years, starting from scratch, he's climbed to the 2nd spot on City's wealth list. And aren't the White's resources his by blood? Eventually, everything's gonna be his anyway. When he got closer, I realized he was the guy who lent me his phone the other day. No wonder he looked familiar. It was Felix. The Whites have a legacy of achievements. Their descendants are either politicians or in the military. Felix, however, went into business. 1 year during college entrance exams, I watched him in an interview. He was the first to finish the test and come out. The reporter asked about his dream school and future goals. With his back to a sky ablaze with clouds, he smirked, eyes full of swagger, and said, "Apply to City A's finance school. become the richest in City A. Snapping back to now, seeing his still confident face from above, I knew he was just a step away from that goal. Felix looked interested in the gift too. Smiling, he offered, "Mind if I do the honors?" As he and the silver-haired guy tugged on the box, I put on my Bluetooth earpiece and commanded Jay, "Let go." Jay's someone I met while working at the factory. Unlike me, his dad's a tycoon from the neighboring city. He was here to experience life, after refusing to take over the family business. "Who's this punk stealing the spotlight?" Jay grumbled but obeyed, letting go. The sudden release made Vivian almost trip backward. "Vivian!" Ken and Carter, her protectors, rushed to support her, glaring at Felix. Yet Vivian, too fixated on the gift box, didn't bother with performances. Felix, noticing her gaze, said, "Vivian seems eager to see this gift, huh? Guess I'll open it." Before Vivian could make an excuse, the box was opened. A blue hologram projected onto the villa wall, showing intertwined bodies. Sharp intakes of breath echoed around, followed by a few screams as the video played. The women present screamed and shielded their eyes. The men, however, were riveted, and soon noticed the only woman on screen was among them. "Hey, isn't that Vivian? And those guys are." Many glanced between Vivian and the 5 men Jay brought. Carter looked sick, grabbing Vivian's shoulders. "Vivian, is this you?" No, it's not me." Vivian protested, pale as a ghost. "Then why are you in there?" "It's a bad lie. Hard to believe, Vivian." Carter, forget logic, just couldn't buy it. "Carter, watch your tone." Ken moved forward, punching Carter protectively while shielding Vivian. Watching them tear into each other from upstairs was satisfying. I poured myself another drink, amused. Vivian clung to Ken's sleeve, her lifeline, but caught my eyes as I watched the scene. "It's her. She did it," Vivian accused, pointing at me. Everyone's eyes fell on me. I waved at them. Unfortunately, since Edward hadn't revealed who I was, most didn't recognize me. "Is she the real daughter Edward found?" Felix glanced at me, puzzled but intrigued. Feigning sadness, I said, "No love from Dad and Mom." Poor little me. Thought I'd get love by reuniting with family, but nope, got locked up instead. How could this happen? So scary. Felix tried hard to suppress a smile, playing along with over-the-top acting. Folks started to get it. "Stop acting. They were the ones who took you," Vivian shrilled, accusing me. Innocently, I shot back, "Then why are you on that video, not me?" "Don't be hasty, the video's not over." Felix chimed in. Sure enough, the hologram switched to footage of 5 men leading me out of a private room. Vivian, excited, pointed to the screen. "See, that's Violet they're taking." But none of them showed their faces. "You recognized them how?" I asked lightly. Vivian froze, stammering after a moment, "Their bodies, duh." "Oh, checking out their bodies, huh?" Before Vivian could rebuff, the footage changed again. There I was beating up the 5 guys. "Ma'am, have mercy. Vivian made us do it." Their faces swollen, barely conscious, they lay on the ground begging. "Mommy," they wriggle like caterpillars. A child pulled away from his mother, giggling at the screen. The sequence kept looping, revealing everything. Vivian stood pale and stiff. Edward, looking grim, stumbled back into the villa with the butler's help. Ken snapped out first, smashing the projector and politely asking guests to leave. Bodyguards couldn't catch Jay, and no one dared approach Felix. The 2 stayed put. Inside, Edward fumed, calling Vivian a disgrace and demanding she leave. Vivian certainly had an eye for picking a main character. Carter just dumped a breakup line and took off, and Ken still tried persuading to keep him around. In exchange, he needed to secure an investment from Country M. If he fails, he and Vivian would be out. Of course, Edward's disdainful look didn't change until he heard Felix's proposal. Felix wasn't joking. Was he really planning to marry me, the daughter just found? Edward's eyes twinkled. Felix chuckled, "Surely not your daughter with the wild lifestyle." Vivian's face went white, then red, not sure if it was from anger or embarrassment. I silently gave Felix a thumbs up. Edward nodded eagerly, ready to discuss the dowry. No one asked if I wanted this. It didn't matter. If the daughter could bring in money, that was good enough. I didn't. Jay started to object, and I quickly covered his mouth. Felix looked over, hands in his pockets, with a bit of a nonchalant air. "I haven't asked yet, Miss Violet. Would you marry me?" I agreed, smiling and nodding. So that's how Felix and I set our wedding plans. Dowry, a 45% stake in his company. Privately, Felix and I agreed that he'd help me deal with the booths, and I'd help him top the wealth charts. Because of that 45% stake, the old man started acting nice to me. His golden rule is, the booths don't keep deadweight, and even though he knew about Vivian's wild lifestyle, as long as it didn't harm his reputation, he couldn't care less. But today's situation would definitely affect the company stocks. When Edward learned I got the stake in S Group, he summoned me to his study that night. On the desk sat a new share transfer document. Sign it, Edward said matter-of-factly and tossed me a pen. I twirled the pen in my fingers and Edward scoffed. You'll be announced as the sole heir of the booths in a few days. He thought this was a huge favor. I opened the pen cap, and he sighed in relief, adding, Violet, I always wanted you to claim your roots, but you weren't quite up to it. The sharp tip of the pen pierced the thick mahogany desk, right where Edward had his finger. He recoiled, his old eyes trembling. What do you mean? Casually playing with the pen, I asked, I want to know how my real mom died. His gaze shifted. Didn't I tell you? It was suicide. She just couldn't think straight. Why would someone in her right mind commit suicide? Because your mom was crazy. He stood up, shaking with emotion, staring at me disgustedly. You're crazy just like her. I couldn't get the truth about my mom from Edward. Everyone in the booths sang the same tune. They all said my mom was crazy, that she'd long been depressed and self-harming, and that Edward was doting and forgiving. But someone like her, how could she be depressed? Nobody knew. Before I became the booth's true daughter, I already knew my real mom. Back then, I called her Mandy, and she came to teach in the mountains. She was my language teacher. She was gentle, always smiling, with the best temperament. No matter how rebellious I was, she was always patient, teaching me again and again. She cared if I ate well, dressed warmly, or had enough money for school. Later, when I returned to the booths, I wondered if she knew my identity all along. Because of her, I behaved in school for a while, until she changed schools and left. I wasn't overly sad, knowing no one stays with anyone forever. Just as I began to forget her, I received a letter from her. In it, she urged me to study hard, sent me enough money to finish college. With that money, I moved out of the slums and working in a factory. I thought she'd be pissed and come looking for the money. But after that, I never heard from her again, learning of her death at the booths. I visited the school where she taught in City A. Unexceptionally, both teachers and students said she was quiet and introverted. Edward would pick her up daily, often giving flowers, the ultimate doting husband in others' eyes. Vivian and Ken were like her loving children. The family dined at various restaurants regularly. In short, no one believed my real mom's death was linked to the booths. On the way back, I saw a bakery by the roadside and asked the driver to stop. I went in and got a slice of Black Forest cake, sat by the window to eat. The cream was rich and smooth, the taste familiar. The shop owner chatted with me. You're so pretty, just like a regular customer I used to have. Such a shame. Really? Is it her? I immediately searched my phone for my mom's photo. The owner was taken aback, glanced at my phone, and nodded excitedly. Yes, do you really know Mandy? Mandy was my mom's name. I put away my phone, kept eating. Why was it a shame? Because of her illness? Are you her daughter? You don't look like her. The owner was puzzled but replied, yes, it's a shame she got sick, but it wasn't within her control. Blame her family. Not a good one among them. The owner fumed. From her, I finally found cracks in the booth's facade. Leaving the bakery, I realized the car waiting by the street was gone. Don't move or I'll kill you. A sharp object pressed into my lower back. Turning slightly, I saw a familiar, worn face. It was Simon. I made sure he'd never be a man, and now he was seeking revenge. I followed him into an alley, where his face twisted in hostility, pressing a blade to mine. Bitch, you ruined my life. Do you know? His whole body trembled from anger or fear, I couldn't tell. Well, at least you're still breathing now. Can't promise for later. At the alley's entrance appeared a tall figure. Felix's tone was teasing, his alluring eyes slightly narrowed, gaze deep. Who the hell are you? Don't come closer. Simon yelled, pulling a gun from his pocket. Felix and I both raised our eyebrows. He raised his hands, backing up a few steps. Buddy, don't do anything rash. He didn't finish his sentence, and suddenly lunged at me. Simon was briefly stunned. Then a few deafening shots rang out in the alley. By the time Felix arrived, I already had Simon beneath my foot. I was stepping on his face, his hands tied behind his back, and I shot Felix a quick glance. This guy, with his slick moves, didn't even get hit by a single shot. Noticing my gaze, Felix gave me a flirtatious wink, which gave me the creeps. I took Simon to an abandoned building in the suburbs. After a bit of torture, he ratted out that Vivian was the one who egged him on for revenge, and who also diverted the driver. But none of this was what I wanted to know. I cut off one of his fingers, and that's when I found out Ken had what I wanted. Simon passed out from the pain, and I stepped out of the abandoned building. Felix was still there, waving at me in the bright sunshine. How'd it go? Need a hand? I tossed the severed finger his way. Help dispose of the evidence, will ya? On the day of the engagement party, I sat in the dressing room, watching Vivian drape herself around my fiancé, demanding a kiss. Felix grabbed her jaw with a smile. Trying to seduce your brother-in-law again? Vivian's eyes lit up, and she provocatively challenged, Think you can, dear brother-in-law? Sister's a real tigress. She bit her lip, her eyes lingering, full of teasing. Why not? Felix's smile was a little strained, but his deep, seductive voice was flawless. However, he leaned in slightly, whispering into Vivian's ear, You'll need to show me how good you are at seducing. Not long after the engagement party, Country M invested in S Group. Ken couldn't fulfill the promise to Edward, and both siblings were booted from the booths. Upon finding out that Vivian had betrayed the booths, Edward almost had her captured and sold. Kim was nearly beaten to a pulp trying to protect her. When Felix and I got to the hospital room, Kim was holding up his four, pleading with Vivian. Simon, Felix is lying to you. Don't go to them. Impossible. Stop clinging to me. Vivian impatiently brushed off his hand, and the clear four lines suddenly turned red. You're so annoying. Let me be honest. I wasn't the one who saved you back then. You did save me. Who else could it be? Ken's voice was low and hoarse. Simon, Big Brother will get better. Please don't leave. The person who saved you wasn't her. At my words, they both turned to look at me with eyes full of hate. Because it was me who saved you, I continued. The siblings were stunned, with Vivian's attention clearly elsewhere, uninterested in who saved Ken. Felix, why are you with her? She stared at the person behind me with a trembling voice. You promised you would. Promise what? Felix's alluring eyes curled into a playful smirk. You really are foolish. You don't even have any use for me. You tricked me? Vivian trembled with rage, her eyes about to bulge out of her head. Annoyed, I frowned at Felix. She's too loud. Take her out. Felix hesitated, but relented when he met my gaze. Before dragging Vivian away, he warned, Don't get too close to him, or I'll make him pay. I impatiently waved him off, urging him to hurry. With the room quiet again, Ken's bloodshot eyes fixated on me. What did you mean by what you said just now? Patiently, I retold the story of rescuing him, details of the time, place, and the process. Not that I expected him to repay the favor. I just wanted to see the absurdity of him thanking the wrong person. As expected, Ken looked even more defeated after hearing my account. Although competent at work, his stubborn and inflexible nature was a fatal flaw, especially towards himself. Believing Vivian to be his savior, he turned a blind eye to her wrongdoings, always indulgent and lenient. He had no complaints even when the man who took him in, Edward, left him crippled. A person like him is best kept as a loyal yet savage dog, someone who'd bite for you when necessary. I looked at him impassively and asked, Help your sister find someone to disgrace me, seduce my fiancé, and supply guns to kill me. Is this how you repay your lifesaver? Yes, everything that happened to me involved Ken. His wrongdoings went beyond just that. Confronted by my question, Ken couldn't retort, and ended up coughing up blood. Avoiding the splatter, I stepped back, gazing at him coldly. If you want atonement, tell me everything Mandy suffered at the booths. At the mention of her name, he spat out another mouthful of blood, choking as the blood entered his windpipe. I waited patiently, only pressing record when he began to speak in a hoarse voice. Mom, she was a good mother. She gave me the kind of motherly love I never knew before. And it was me who killed her, he said, his gaze hollow, voice slow and dreary. He spoke of the moments with Mandy and her life at the booths. It was a life akin to hell. Edward loved to hit people and cared about appearances. The only ones he could torment were his wife and children. To protect Vivian and Ken, Mandy was always beaten half to death. Initially, Vivian and Ken would console her. But with time, Vivian became dissatisfied. Even without us, she'd still be beaten? If she didn't always piss off Dad, we wouldn't get dragged into this. So to curry favor with Edward, Vivian started handing him the whip when Mandy was being beaten. Ken argued with Vivian several times, but ultimately accepted it all. Once the old man deliberately tested Ken's resolve, asking him to hit Mandy, or he'd hit Vivian. It was no surprise that Ken chose to save his weak little sister. After that, they became indifferent to Mandy's suffering, acting as if she were a stranger. They covered for Edward, pretending the family was harmonious. When Mandy sought help, they dismissed it as madness. How did she die? Was it really suicide? I calmly asked. Ken looked up at me. His eyes were blood red. No, it was Dad who killed her, but she did it for me. Ken and Vivian's bond ran deeper than mere sibling ties. When Edward discovered it, he beat them savagely. Mandy confronted Edward to protect Ken, and was pushed down the stairs to her death. Dead is dead, whether it's one person or two. Edward immediately thought about killing the two witnesses as well. In a life or death moment, Ken suddenly said to him, Mom committed suicide due to depression. Simon and I saw it. I looked on coldly, and said in a chilling voice, So it was your idea? Ken froze, his trembling lips looking paler than the hospital walls. Before leaving, Ken handed me a USB drive. Inside was footage of Mandy being abused at home and ultimately murdered. With both testimonies and evidence, even with all Edward's money, thanks to Felix, he wouldn't escape a bullet. Vivian and Ken, who kept quiet, would join him in prison. Before his execution, Edward asked to see me one last time. Gladly, I accepted, as I had prepared a special gift for him. A copy of his medical report. He might have wanted to tell me my mom knew I was swapped, and wanted me to regret seeking revenge for her. I chuckled from my seat, and while he was puzzled, I revealed a truth to him. Back then, my mom allowed me to be swapped to protect me, because he was actually infertile. Neither I nor Vivian was his biological daughter. My blood type just happened to match his. But now all his money is mine. On the day of Edward's execution, I visited my mom's grave. Don't thank me. I was just after the old man's money, not avenging you. I ate an entire Black Forest cake by her grave. As I was leaving the cemetery, both Felix and Jay arrived. Felix got out and walked towards me, while Jay tried to follow, but I stopped him with a look. Per our agreement, I helped you become #1 on the wealth list. The stock transfer agreement was fake. What else does Felix want? It's real, he said. What? I looked up to meet his gaze. The stock transfer agreement is real, and so is my intention to marry you, Felix said, those enchanting eyes of his carrying a rare sincerity. I chuckled. That's a different price. 45% of the shares isn't enough. And